This is probably the most important technique Hitchcock uses through his career. Unlike many other films who turn the audience into an objective spectator, a Hitchcock film entices you to not just watch, but to actively figure out the story of the character.
You're sure making time tonight, reader. What's the big rush?
I want to get to bed. That's the rush.
So you've pushed your lead character to the brink of failure.
Have you not?
And then someone else swoops in and saves the day, just because they happen to stumble upon the scene.
You're all clear, kid. Now let's blow this thing and go home.
Mom, don't do it. Mom, no.
According to Hitchcock, that is terrible filmmaking. Characters should win or lose, meaning achieve their goals because of the choices they made, that are grounded on their experience and the courage to overcome their fears. So Hitchcock made it very clear as a rule for his films. There can only ever be one coincidence, often at the beginning of the film.
You have a vacancy.
Oh, we have 12 vacancies. 12 cabins, 12 vacancies. They moved away the highway.
That sets things in motion that are already latently existing. And then from that point forward, the film resolves because of the hero and the obstacles she needs to face.
Cabin 1. It's closer in case you want anything. Right next to the office.
Tell your story visually. Think of your film as a silent film where you don't have the luxury to have characters inform the audience. Use suspense for a long-lasting audience engagement. Give the audience more information than the character so that they can worry about the outcome. Don't use more than one coincidental event in your film, and let everything else be motivated by your character's action. So these are my 3 favorite Hitchcock techniques. I'm surprised how little they're used today, even though I think they can be pretty much applied to any film genre. Do let me know if there are some other Hitchcock techniques worth adding to the list. I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.
Valerian, rated PG-13.
First time I can remember seeing Vertigo was at its first release here in New York, and I saw it in its original VistaVision projection with Hitchcock's extraordinary use of color. Over the years, I kept being drawn and drawn to the picture, like being drawn into a whirlpool of obsession. A very, very beautiful, comfortable, almost nightmarish obsession. And I think, for me, I found it fascinating years later when I look back and realized that towards the end of the studio system, such a highly personal movie could come out of that studio system with major stars.
In 1951, Alfred Hitchcock came to San Francisco for the opening of Strangers on a Train. The master of suspense always liked to show the audience a familiar setting and then introduce an unexpected twist of malice. As he studied the visual splendor of the Golden Gate Bridge, Hitchcock was heard to remark that San Francisco would be a good location for a murder mystery.
He loved San Francisco. He felt it was a very glamorous city. He felt it was rather like an American Paris. That's how he described it. He felt it was very cosmopolitan, more so than any of the cities he had seen at that time.
It would take 6 years before the romantic and mysterious images forming in Hitchcock's imagination would find their way to the screen. Working for Paramount in the 1950s, he made a string of remarkable movies, beginning with Rear Window, and culminating with Vertigo. Universal Studios was Hitchcock's creative home for the final decades of his career. Here, Vertigo would be rescued from the ravages of time by Robert Harris and James Katz.
We chose Vertigo as a candidate for restoration for two reasons. Number one, it's a great film. It's one of the most important films ever made. Number two, the film elements themselves, both picture and sound, were in dire need of preservation.
Vertigo is also a film that audiences have not seen on the big screen for years, in fact 12 years. It was last released theatrically in 1984, and the elements were poor, to say the least. You don't just start a restoration, you have to do a lot of research. We bring in elements from all over the world to one place where we can look at them and assess the quality of the picture and the sound, and decide at a certain point, can we do this at all? There are many films that are not possible to restore.
When we first opened the cans on Vertigo, basically what we found was a faded negative. Virtually looked in many scenes as though the negative had been dragged on the floor before it had been printed. And we had differential shrinkage between the yellow, cyan, and magenta separation masters, which really led us to restore the film in a totally different manner. Once a picture either has gotten to a point where it has not been preserved properly, or it hasn't been preserved at all, then you need restoration. To preserve a film is a phone call, a purchase order, a lab order. To restore a film is a year to 2 years of work and major commitment.
Universal would commit more than $1 million to the restoration of Vertigo. Alfred Hitchcock believed in what he called pure cinema, pictures without words. Once he had a setting in mind, his next step was to find a story. The French novel D'Entre les Morts, From Among the Dead, would provide the foundation for Vertigo. Hitchcock dispatched his longtime associate producer, Herbert Coleman, to begin preparations in Northern California and to find a Spanish mission for the picture's climactic scenes. The landscape of California's pioneer past would stand in eerie visual counterpoint to the scenes of modern San Francisco.
It was 1955, 41 years ago, when I first walked onto this plaza and knew instantly that Mission Old San Juan Bautista would be the location Hitchcock wanted to use in our picture Vertigo.
In this haunting romantic thriller, Detective Scotty Ferguson falls in love with a woman mysteriously drawn to places from the past, a trail leading to a mission bell tower. The script had to be perfect before Hitchcock would begin production. With his wife Alma, he would spend months on story construction before hiring a screenwriter. Playwright Maxwell Anderson was the first writer engaged by Hitchcock and Herbert Coleman.
And he turned in a screenplay called Listen, Darkling, and that will tell you the whole story. No one could figure out what it meant, and the screenplay was exactly the same. So then we found another writer, Alec Koppel, who did a great improvement to Listen, Darkling, but it's still not satisfactory. So then we started a search and found Sam Taylor.
Author of the play Sabrina Fair, filmed twice as Sabrina, Samuel Taylor would spend a year working with Hitchcock on the Vertigo screenplay.
In those first talks, we decided that the more emotion there was in the man, the stronger the picture would be. And he found, without even thinking about it, that he was making a picture that went much deeper than most of his pictures. Just because the basic story, not the plot, but the basic story, had a true human emotion. This obsession of a man who, for the first time in his life, had fallen deeply in love.
Hitchcock's frequent leading man, James Stewart, was perfect casting as the detective with a fear of heights. Hitchcock was enthralled with the young actress Vera Miles. He planned to use Vertigo to build her into a major star. In early 1957, she posed for these hair and costume tests as Madeline. Vera Miles also modeled for this early version of the painting that features prominently in the story, the portrait of Carlotta.
Then is when we started encountering delay after delay, starting with Hitch's problems with his gallbladder. An operation was necessary. Then when Hitch recovered and we were all set to go, Vera Miles announced that she was pregnant and couldn't do the film.
Hitchcock was deeply disappointed, but he couldn't let go of his image of the cool, mysterious Madeline. He finally chose Kim Novak as the incarnation of romantic fantasy in Vertigo. As the 2-year restoration progresses, Harris and Katz draw on state-of-the-art technical facilities at Universal and at laboratories throughout Hollywood. Restoring more than 1,000 pieces of film negative and using original Technicolor prints for reference, they experiment with modern film stocks and processing techniques to recreate the precise visual texture Hitchcock intended for every shot.
Vertigo was photographed in a Paramount process called VistaVision, which was an extremely high-quality process, which was normally reduction printed to 35 millimeter.
VistaVision went through the camera from right to left. It was horizontal, and it was a double-frame 35 millimeter image.
Rather than reduction printing it, we're basically taking it across 1-to-1 and converting it to 70 millimeter. For the first time, people can now see Vertigo the way that it was intended to be seen in large format.
The screenplay was followed religiously. Script supervisor Peggy Robertson made sure the shooting proceeded according to Hitchcock's meticulous preparations.
Every picture I worked with him on.
Everybody runs, but who will escape the night?
Was always storyboarded, and that would be one of the first requisites of his work. Hitch was the only director I've ever known who never looked through a camera. He didn't even stand close to the camera. He would say, "You got 3 inch on then, and you cut there." He'd tell them where they cut, and he'd always be right. He just transformed himself into the camera eye.
Madeline. Jimmy Stewart as Scotty created one of his most brilliant and complex character portraits.
Madeline, tell me.
No.
Madeline, tell me what it is. Where do you go?
No, I
what
can't
takes you
tell
away? When you jumped into the bay, you didn't know where you were. You guessed, but you didn't know.
I didn't jump. I fell. You
Why
told
did
me
you
I
jump?
fell.
Why did you jump?
I think Jimmy personified for my father every man, so that when people went to see a picture, they could put themselves in Jimmy's place. And especially in Vertigo, he wanted the audiences to identify with Jimmy, which is what everybody did.
Hitchcock molded Kim Novak into the strange, aloof Madeline and into Judy, her earthier reincarnation. In perhaps the finest performance of her career, Novak brought a startling emotional intensity to her dual role.
It excites me to work on dual personalities because I think I have many myself. And I think that I was able to use so much of me in that movie. And working with Alfred Hitchcock, I adored working with him because, well, at first I was feeling insecure because I kept saying, well, now, is this right? How do you want me to play this character? And he said, I hired you, and that's why I want what you bring to this role. But what I do expect from you is to stand where I want you to, wear what I want you to, and speak in the rhythm that I want you to. And he worked a long time with me to try to get the right rhythm.
We were forbidden to play here. Sister Teresa would scold us.
Look at this. Here's your gray horse.
Madeline had the complication and the excitement and energy underneath. It was all very, very held back on the outside, but underneath there were so many things going that I think that's part of what fascinated Jimmy Stewart, caused him a compulsion to want her, to possess her.
Well, what is it?
Can I ask you a couple of questions?
What for? Who are you?
My name's John Ferguson.
When he opens the door, do you know, and that feeling of wanting to go to him, of wanting to run away from him, wanting to, you know, all of these mixed conflicts all at one time. It just was really, really powerful.
What's this doohickey?
Here. You know about those things. You're a big boy now.
Scotty's friend Midge was played with great sympathy by the highly acclaimed stage and screen actress Barbara Bel Geddes.
Hitchcock was a wonderful director. I remember he came up to me, I think that first day, and it made me laugh so, because he said, now, Barbara, don't act. Don't act. And that's all he said to me, you see. I remember a scene at the drawing board where Midge was talking and drawing at the same time, and he'd say, Barbara, look up, and I'd look up.
Aren't you ever going to get married?
You know there's only one man in the world for me, Johnny-O.
You mean me? We were engaged once, though, weren't we?
And he'd say, now look down, and I'd look down. And he'd say, now look left, and I'd look left. Anyway, he said, it was what? Cut! Very good, you see. So that was that.
The most celebrated of Hollywood's costume designers, Edith Head, shared Hitchcock's fondness for the use of color to heighten emotion.
Edith loved working with Hitch, and Vertigo was a real